Happy Thanksgiving, everybody. Hello, and welcome to Ellensburg, Washington, USA. Tomorrow's Thanksgiving here in the States. So, happy Thanksgiving. The local time is 1:46 in the afternoon here in Ellensburg, Pacific time. Yeah, 1:46-ish. So if you're watching this in replay, you don't have to stick with us right here. If you're watching this as a replay, you can skip ahead 14 minutes to get to the beginning of the program. But we're live right now with 146 people, I guess. And it's time to say hello to everybody, ask how things are going. I guess my first question is, are we 5 by 5? Lappy microphone. Lappy, can we hear Lappy microphone? Lapel, 5 by 5. Thump, thump, thump. Lappy, thank you. Great, thank you. Okay, well, let's say hi to some folks. Where are you viewing from? And thank you for joining us this afternoon, or this evening, or tomorrow morning. Joe's in Seattle. Yuki is in Wonderland. John's in Houston, Texas. Cincinnati, Ohio. Glasgow, Scotland, coming in 5 by 5. Oakland, California. Omak, Washington. Petersburg, Alaska. Hi, Cache Creek North. Scrolling back now, slowing down the chat. Bob's in Squim. Rodney is in Quilcene, Vancouver, BC. Hello, Dirja. Lake Orion, Michigan. Happy Thanksgiving. Thank you, Wes. Thank you. Same to you. Kelso, Washington. Don's in Los Angeles. Crown House is in Vienna, Austria. Adam is in, whoops, just automatic scroll. Sorry, Adam. I didn't catch where you were. Sorry about that. Lake Ozark, Missouri. Andy's in Portland, Oregon. Rick's in Anacortes, Washington. Santa Clarita, California. Hello. Tacoma Fault, that's where Kim is. Durango, Colorado, that's David. Menominee, Michigan, John. Teza is in Hobart, Tasmania. Hello, from the Northern Hemisphere. Other distant lands, Garrett from the Netherlands. He's the Dutch night owl, everybody. Lorraine is in Blodgett, Oregon. Douglas is in Clyde Park, Montana. I'm coming down to live now, see who we got. And we're up to 270 or so. Go Packers, says John. Grammy by the Lake, that's Donna in Chelan, Washington. Letha Lee, Skagit Ed, Jim's in Crystal, Minnesota. Sipe, is in the Netherlands. Richard is in Gypsum, Colorado. Donna's in Ellensburg. Yeah, we had some snow, didn't we, Donna? We had some snow yesterday late, some freezing rain, some sleet. But a warm front came through overnight, I think, and so it's over 45 degrees Fahrenheit right now, which is very unusual for us. It's been quite a few weeks since we've had those temperatures. I almost wanted to do this outside. It's so beautiful right now, but I know that sun wouldn't last much longer. The sun will disappear behind Menashtash Ridge soon enough. Paul's in Door County, Woods, Wisconsin. Fred's in Seattle. Papagino's in Boulder Creek, California. Kent is in Jackson, Louisiana. Wish we had a Vinmans. Okay, well, speaking of Vinmans, thank you for the reminder. So this episode of Baja BC A to Z, I don't know why I stumbled there. This episode C, called Hit and Run, is brought to you by Vinmans Bakery in beautiful downtown Ellensburg, Washington. You've got to love it. So that's right. This is a fruitcake that Jeff, the owner of Vinmans Bakery, dropped off at my office about an hour ago. And two more. So I have 3 fruitcakes from Vinmans, and I wasn't here. I was home studying for you guys. So Jeff texted me. I got to email Basil. I know. Don't let me forget emailing Basil. I'm screwing around here. So Jeff said, hello from Discovery Hall. This is Jeff texting me when I was at home an hour ago. I just put 3-year-old small fruitcakes outside of your office door. They are firm, but might be useful as props. If you dare to eat them, I suggest dousing them with rum. Happy Thanksgiving. So this is maybe the busiest day of the year for Jeff at Vindman's Bakery, and yet he took time to walk these up. I don't know if these were left over in the freezer last year or this was like the whole plan all along, Jeff, but I don't know if you're with us, but thank you, Vindman's Bakery, as always, for the generosity and the inspiration. Here's to you, Jeff. Cheers. All right, I want to say hi to a few more folks, but I can't forget Basil here. Hang on. Add guest, copy link, paste link. Email sent to our guest, Basil Tikoff in Madison, Wisconsin. Do you ever catch yourself and just go like, this is magic? How does that like go through the air and go to Wisconsin, where I grew up? And then a minute later, Basil's with us. There are moments. I gotta have moments that just go, wow. Oh, Jeff is here. The busiest, but I'm all done and happy to be here. Hey, Jeff. You're done. Hey, so while you're here, let's open one of these up for everybody. I do want to say hi to a few folks. We got 400 now rolling in. Oh boy, should have prepared. This is suddenly an unwrapping video or unpackaging, or what do they call those? Oh boy. I'm going to get crumbs all over my keyboard, but I don't care. I'm a professional. So, Jeff, are you handling the questions already? Are the questions like, are you selling these this year? I'm screwing up your arrangement. I'll just do that. I'm screwing everything up. Come on, focus. There we go. Whoa, I really am screwing things up. Okay, I can't hold it. Greenie, going in. Greenie, going in. Thank you, Vindman's Bakery. Let's say hi to a few more. You might have to retype. I'm live right now. You might have to retype where you are viewing from if you would like to be acknowledged, whatever. I'm glad you're here. Basil's here. Wonderful. Hi, Basil. Hanging out in the green room. I'm thinking a half an hour, Basil. I don't know. I had a few moments of inspiration mid-morning. 20 minutes maybe. I don't know. See how quickly I can get to you. Whoa. Bob, are you really in Antarctica right now? Bob and Kathy? Are you from Antarctica? You're watching from Antarctica live? Is that true? That would be a first. Veterans of the scene, has that ever happened before? Have we ever had you? I'm so excited I can't speak. I mean, I was impressed with the magic of sending an email to Madison, Wisconsin in Weeks Hall, but no shit. Sorry, Patrick. Bob is in Antarctica right now watching this thing. Wow. All I can say is wow. That is really amazing. So thank you, especially you guys on vacation, or actually, would you mind? Are you guys on vacation? Are you part of some sort of citizen science project or something? Or be very curious. Barbara is in Guam. It's 9 a.m. Thursday there. Hi, Barbara. Thanks for joining us. It's maybe warmer in Australia than here right now. Yes, Rachel. Hi, Rachel's in Flagstaff, Arizona, I assume. Yeah, there'll be Q&A with Basil, for sure. Geologically speaking. Andrew's in Perth, Australia. Papagino says, wow, I think that's all 7 continents. I do think that's right. We have had a smattering of African people watching on occasion, not that common, but I think that's a first. Wow, that's really great. I'll watch the replay, Bob and Kathy, and see what you guys are doing down there, but that's really amazing. Yeah, wow. Okay, am I forgetting something? Drink your water, boy. Don't get dehydrated. I don't know why, but I'm a little antsy about the mic. So I'm going to test the mic one more time. In other words, I'm going to disappear behind the chalkboard and then come back. And I want to see if you can still hear me when I go behind. So this is Lappy microphone. Are we 5x5 with Lappy microphone? My back is to you. I can't explain why I get hung up on certain things, but right now I just have the microphone on my brain. Like I want it to be working properly. Lappy's 5x5. Okay. Thank you. Okay, how we doing? Yeah, we got about 3 minutes. Momentarily, I'm going to just kind of pause to get my head right. Felt like I wanted to say something else before. Yeah, okay. I'll wait till we start. Okay. Yep. We'll say hi to just a handful of more folks, and then we will. I need to start concentrating on what we're doing today. Index Pluton. Hello, Phil. We have 500, more than 500 rolling in now. That's great. You know, we're off to a decent start, I would say. This is the 3rd show, of course. C is the 3rd letter in the alphabet last time I checked. And we have about 1,000 watching live and about 10,000 or so watching the replay. And that's familiar from last year. So I can't remember if we built to that, 1,000 watching live and then about 10,000 watching the replay, or if that was the way it was from the start. I can't remember. But my gut feeling says that we're a little bit ahead of that. Like we have you here pretty early in the alphabet, and I would guess, unless I screw things up, I'm guessing that we'll continue to have a bigger and bigger group. It doesn't really matter. We have a big group anyway, but I'm just commenting on that. Okay. Oh, something about Merle? Yeah, I think did somebody say something about Merle? Merle's here? Hello, Merle? Wait a minute. I'm scrolling back. There's something about Merle healing quickly. Well, I missed it. I'll have to see the replay. Okay. Yeah, 1 minute. Would you give me 1 minute? I need to get my head right. Thank you for joining us. We will begin the program in 1 minute. I'm full of burps here also. I need to get those out of my system as well. Okay, thank you. Too much information. See you in 1 minute. Hot mic. Okay. All right, settle your stomach down. What's with the burping? Okay. You're doing a quick recap. You're making that one clarification, and that's going to lead you into the chalkboard that the viewers are looking at. Just make a quick clarification. Oh, don't forget the schedule. Don't forget to announce the schedule. Schedule, clarification. That gets you into the 1 to 10 once again. Make it quick. There's the burp. Excuse me. And then you go into the other green board, and that's going to be the wild card today. You've never done it. You've never drawn it. You didn't even practice it. You're just going to do it. Practice. Talking about practice? Practice. Huh. Talking about practice. No, you didn't practice it, but you can do it. Make it quick. Get to the laptop and then to Basil. Set him up. This is for Basil. This is all about Basil. It's not about you. You're setting up the guest. That's all you're doing. Make it quick. Make it quick. Hello and welcome everybody to Show C. Here we are, the afternoon or evening before the American Thanksgiving. Happy Thanksgiving to you all. I'm not sure if you're watching from your kitchens as you're working on your pies or whatever, but happy Thanksgiving to everybody, and let's go ahead and earn our break. That's what I usually say in class. You know, there's a big break coming up. Well, let's work real hard. Let's earn our time off, and that applies here as well. I need to go right to the schedule before I forget. Speaking of breaks, we have just started the alphabet series, but we're going to take a break. Because tomorrow is an American holiday, this is the Thanksgiving weekend here in the States, and Liz and I will be down in Oregon for the next few days. We're going to take off, I think, at 7 tomorrow morning or something. And so we are not doing session D on Saturday. If you think to show up Saturday morning at 9 a.m., which is our normal time, ain't nobody going to be here, okay? So I'm letting you know that after today's episode, we will wait a full week until next Wednesday, September 30th at 2 p.m. Pacific, and we will resume the series. Who's going to be the guest next week? I don't know. I've just gotten myself through these first 3 episodes. There's been a lot going on at school as well. Basil can probably relate to that as well. You're just trying to get through the day kind of a thing. There's a lot coming at you. But my schedule is starting to slow a little bit. And what I was able to just kind of do in the last couple of weeks is put this together. So this is the third of our opening 3 shows in the alphabet, Baja BC A to Z. And this third show is kind of a nice bookend to the Darrell Cowan show. In other words, we are looking at, for the first time, a brand new paper that is coming out 50 years after the original Baja BC paper. And so 25 years in between each of these, I just kind of like that. And so these 3 shows, and Basil's going to talk about his paper a bit, is, I think, the way that we are kind of wrapping up the opening to this series. The whole goal of these first 3 shows, if you haven't figured it out yet, or maybe you're seeing this one and haven't seen A and B, I don't know, but I'm hoping you're watching these in sequence. I'm just trying to set the tone for this. I'm trying to give you a sense of who I am, what I'm trying to do, what my objectives are, and to remind you, my objectives are very, very simple. They're very modest. I just want to learn new things. I want to visit with a number of live guests. I think it's, unless there's some problem scheduling-wise, we're going to have a guest every show. So that's 26 guests. Some of them familiar to us, some of them new. And I just want to have them come on and share some of their data with us, whether it's data from 50 years ago or 25 years ago or this year. And I've already kind of not rehearsed, but I've already cleared it with Basil that he will be coming back at some point. So this is not our one and only time with Basil Tikoff this winter. And I need to say that because we're not going to get into the nitty-gritty. Hey, I got to ask Basil, is the nitty-gritty still there in Madison? Marsh Shapiro's nitty-gritty restaurant? I used to hang out there all the time. We're not getting into the nitty-gritty today with Basil. Instead, continuing with the theme of the first 2 letters, I want to hear the backstory on Basil and how he got into this Baja BC stuff, why he continues to be dealing with Baja, why he hasn't been scared away like a bunch of other people, and we'll get into it that way. So this is kind of a more the kind of background of Basil than you experienced last winter, and he'll probably say, hey, that's enough, let's get back to the geology. But anyway, that's the take for this, and just please be aware that the details of Basil's brand new paper, which wait for you at nickzentner.com, not secure. The paper's there, but we're not going to dissect it in detail today. Okay, so keep it moving. I don't really have an outline today. Instead, my first objective is to clarify something that I have been doing in the first 2 shows, introducing the concept of fixist and mobilist. And you saw show A, and our guest was Linda Nosen, and Linda hadn't thought about this stuff for 45 years or maybe even 50 years, her own words. But she's kind of been charged by this. And I've been emailing back and forth with Linda over the last week or so. And she's like, I'm still thinking about what happened, in that first show. And I've got some additional thoughts and a couple of links and other things. So that's been fun to kind of like learn from her. And one of the things she kind of helped me see was that the usage of the terms fixist and mobilist 50 years ago is kind of different than the way that I'm using these terms now. So what do I mean? I mean, if you were in geology departments 50 years ago and you used the term fixist, you're one of these old dudes who didn't believe in plate tectonics. that these continents were moving around. That was the fixist thing. The original version of the word fixist was North America hasn't moved. Europe hasn't moved. Antarctica, where Bob and Kathy are watching right now, has never moved. And if you were a mobilist 50 years ago, you're embracing this new thing 50 years ago called plate tectonics, and that these ocean floors are moving and that North America is moving. Well, to clarify then, in case you were just kind of confused by me using those two terms, that's not what I'm specifically saying with this series. 1 to 10 on our scale, and remember last show, I got the feeling that as we're talking about Baja BC, there's a range of views. Whether you're fully embracing Baja BC, meaning 3,000 kilometers of northward migration, versus 1 on the scale of 1 to 10, being a fixist with Baja BC and saying, I don't see any northward movement at all. Do you see the clarification? Let me hit it right on the head if you don't. Every geologist I've known in my 35 years in geology has been an embracer of plate tectonics. I've never met one geologist who said these continents are not moving, these plates are not moving. That's not a debate anymore. But I am still using these terms fixist and mobilist, talking about how much northward movement. Do we have it now? I think many of you, maybe most of you saw that last couple of shows, but I'm just clarifying that if you're 1, you're saying that Mount Stewart has not moved north at all. That the magma of Mount Stewart was created at the precise latitude that it exists today. And if you're up to 10, Mount Stewart, the batholith of Mount Stewart, crystallized from magma into solid 3,000 kilometers plus to the south, which puts you in Baja, Mexico. Okay, what's new today? What's new today is that I'm adding, well, I'm not adding this. Remember I mentioned the accordion then? So you're visualizing, if you're number 1, you're visualizing movement of crust, and ocean scraps are coming in and they're accreting onto the edge of North America. They're moving, but you're still a fixist because you're just viewing things in an east-west sense, and there's not any northern movement. So I use the analogy of an accordion. I don't know if I like it, but squeeze box or accordion, we compress for a while and then we extend for a while. If you want it, 100 million years ago, we start compressing, we compress, and then 53, 52, 50, 55, whatever, in the early 50s, millions of years ago, we suddenly start to extend the accordion. Fixist, accordion. Cymbalist, a percussionist playing cymbals in the orchestra, in the symphony orchestra, that's my analogy for a mobilist, where the symbol on the left is the insular superterrane, Rangelia and Friends, Mount Stewart, Ingle, the whole thing. That's one symbol striking North America at an angle, oblique collision, make contact. I don't know, do the symbols scrape past each other and then just continue north? And the title of our meeting today and the title of the brand new paper by Basil Tikoff is Hit and Run, with the symbols. Hit the symbols and then run the symbols up to get a nice sound. Hit and run. And that's Baja BC. So Basil's a 10. Basil, you're a 10. Basil's a 10. We're talking about a 10 today. Basil wants 3,000 plus kilometers of northward movement of Mount Stewart and a whole bunch of other stuff. Last opening comment, I will be having guests in between 1 and 10 this winter. But you're getting a 10 today. We're not going to be at the 10 the whole winter, but we're with a 10 today. Okay, so we're going to compare and contrast between, and this is done in Basil's new paper, taking an old model, flat slab subduction, which sounds familiar to you from last winter. We did a show on the Rocky Mountains. I got into flat slab subduction. We're going to revisit some of that today, but hopefully in a more concentrated, kind of boiled down, greatest hits kind of a version. That's the hope. And that's William Dickinson, who was the former advisor to Darrell Cowan at Stanford. It's a small world. And in 1987, Dickinson and Snyder write this paper called Flat Slab Subduction. I'm going to draw it for you. That's what I'm going to draw quickly if you heard the hot mic segment. I'm going to draw it without practice. Quickly. And then we're going to jump to Basil's proposed model called the hit and run, which is an alternative hypothesis to flat slab subduction. So before I do the drawing, let me hit you with a major point. He pauses for dramatic effect. We're talking about the Rocky Mountains today and Baja BC. And that's Basil speaking through his paper. More than one paper, by the way. He says, if you really are talking about Baja BC, and we are this winter, you can't just talk about Baja BC. You have to talk about the Rocky Mountains as well. And you're like, what? That's like half the American West. You're right, more than half. Yeah. We need to fold the Rocky Mountains into this. And so suddenly the stakes are raised. And suddenly, maybe if we start talking about Rocky Mountain kind of, if this 1 to 10 has bearing on how the Rocky Mountains form, maybe it makes a little more sense to you why we would have people 1 through 10. Because the conventional wisdom, still the conventional popular model for building the Rocky Mountains is over here. And so if you are over here with the Rockies, then you're under 5 typically with Baja BC, if you even acknowledge Baja BC is worth your time. Websites, popular lectures, popular books. I'm not picking on Keith. This is the company line. This is the majority view. Rob Thomas last winter was talking about this. Flat slab subduction, building the Rocky Mountains. Okay, pick it up. So he goes to the other green board, and we're going to start drawing as quickly as possible. Yep, 13 minutes. Good. Okay, this is going away. This I don't know if I'll use, but I'll keep it handy. Bye-bye. All right. This is where I earn my money here. Can I do this? Oh, let me do yellow. So what I'd like to try to do is boil down the main message from Basil's paper. We're going to go to the laptop right before we go to Basil. And I don't know, he might be surprised I'm getting into this, but Basil, I just feel like I want to try this. It will give us a little context for our discussion about your background. Okay. So here's the flat slab subduction model that's first presented in 1987. And here's the hit and run, which was first proposed by Basil as a graduate student, I guess. We'll hear the story, University of Minnesota, hit and run version 1 in the mid-1990s. And then he has taken that hit and run model and updated it. Redux this year, 50 years after the original Merle Beck paper. Okay, I'm kind of stalling. Okay, all right, here we go. Let's go. So, flat slab subduction. I have a map of U.S. states in the West, and I want to draw a cross section at the same time. Okay? In California, Bill Dickinson taught at Stanford University. In California, we have the California Triad. I don't need to draw it all out. We did that last time with Daryl. Remember? Franciscan complex, or Franciscan assemblage, as Daryl called it, Great Valley sequence, volcanic arc. The volcanic arc, according to the flat slab subduction model, is the result of subduction of the Farallon plate. Farallon plate. And there's a relatively steep angle to the subduction of the Farallon plate, which makes cascade-like volcanoes, cone-shaped stratovolcanoes, like we have in the Andes of South America today, like we have in the Pacific Northwest, right over there, Mount Rainier. Okay? Subduction related. Those exist. Those are a thing. And so our volcanoes on this map between 120 colors, 120 to 85. So we have these blue volcanoes erupting where we now have the Sierra Nevada mountains, right? That's the Sierra Nevada granite. Those are the magma chambers of these once active volcanic arc mountain range. That's a classic, well-behaved, subduction zone-fed volcanic arc that existed between 120 million years ago and 85 million years ago. Now, when's Baja BC time? He goes to the magic time stick. Precambrian, Paleozoic, Mesozoic, Cenozoic. So yes, I have drawn in our Baja BC time. And if you're new to us, shame on you for not watching the first two shows. You got homework to do. But we now know that Baja BC is a time frame primarily between 85 and 55 million years ago. And during this black bar here, we have, depending on who you talk to, a bunch of northward movement, northward migration, large-scale translation of the insular superterrane and other scraps. 85 to 55 million years ago. Well, in Dickinson's model, we have this subduction between 120 and 85 million years ago, and our volcanism is here, and there's nothing happening inland. We don't have the Rockies yet, according to this model. Switch to blue chalk. No, switch to red chalk. Red chalk time is 85 to 53. So in other words, 85 million years ago is the big date. 85 million years ago, everything changes. And we're in the flat slab model. The model that's number one on the scale of 1 to 10. The one that does not acknowledge that Baja BC thing is even a thing. Doesn't acknowledge the exotic terrains of the Pacific Northwest. They just don't exist in Bill Dickinson's mind. And so we're going to kill these volcanoes 85 million years ago. We're going to have them go away. And we're going to make solid granite and kill this volcanic system. 85, we shut off the Sierra Nevada system. But the system doesn't stop. In this top model, we start getting thrust faults through Nevada and western Utah, severe. So that's here. Pizza boxes, severe thrusting, and then further inland yet. Again, during this 85 to 53 million year old time, we have block uplifts. Block uplifts of the Laramide orogeny. So now we are talking about the Rocky Mountains. Severe style thrust faults, thin-skinned, and Laramide block uplift, thick-skinned. And this is all happening east of where the Sierra Nevada arc used to be. The finishing touch to Dickinson's story is that that's all happening because you simply change the angle of the subducting plate. You flatten out the angle of the subducting Farallon plate, and you tickle the underbelly of what is now the Rocky Mountains to create all this. This is cross-section. We're getting messy now. But this shallowing of the Farallon plate has caused this crustal deformation of the severe and laramide orogeny. End of story, according to Bill Dickinson's flat slab model. Pick it up, boy. Basil says we need a hit and run, not a flat slab subduction of the Farallon plate, to explain these same things. So I'm going to pick it up. I was going to do more, but I just want to pick it up. So Basil wants the insular superterrane to hit at 100 million years ago. And Basil, blue chalk, wants plutons and severe style all initiating from that hit. I promised to do it in cross-section. This is cross-section. Insular, which starts the severe thrusting at blue time, 100 million years ago. And we have magmas invading from below at the same time. Basil, I'm unclear if you like a bunch of subduction-generated magmas or not. I'm coming to you with that. But the point is, by the time we get to red, which is 85 to 53, and the block uplifts, that is still all action tied to this enormous hit of the insular superterrane. Now we're going to go to the laptop and give you more carefully constructed diagrams like this, but the data is the same generally between the two things. The only difference I see is that Basil has these thrust faults, or these pizza boxes, starting at 100 million years ago, whereas Dickinson has them starting 85 million years ago. Working up a sweat. Good Lord. Let's switch to the other camera. I don't know how confident I am or how happy I am with that chalkboard discussion. nickzentner.com, not secure. We click on the upper right, that's Baja. Yes, there are 3 papers waiting for you today. This is the original Dickinson paper. This is the first hit and run paper that Basil co-wrote with Julie Maxson. Hit and run collisional model. And then, probably new to everybody, the brand new hit and run model paper that's been revamped as of right now. So that paper waits for you, and I want you to enjoy it. And it will take us all a while to really absorb everything in the paper. But I do want to give you some visuals before we go to our discussion with Basil. This is all in the name of setting up our conversation with Basil instead of starting from scratch. So we're going back to Darrell Cowan in the last show. Mount Stewart is in the caboose of everything yellow and orange, which is the insular superterrane. That's the present configuration. Remember from Darrell's 1997 paper, we have a fixist argument, which is number 1 on the scale, which says that this stuff has always been north of California. Here's the California triad right there, blue, green, and red. Hypothesis B, which Darrell Cowan and his graduate students at the time, back in the 1980s, that's Margie Rushmore, John Garver, Mark Brandon, Paul Umhofer, and others. They're favoring the fact that that California block, that insular superterrane with Mount Stewart down here in Mexico somehow swam north and bypassed the California triad. And you may be confused right now. Let me go back for a second. Can I just check in with you for just a second? Somehow our Baja BC discussion has a direct impact on how we view the Rocky Mountains. That's the main thing we're doing today. And I think we've been flirting with it time and time again, but we're trying to hit it head on. And especially with Basil's discussion live, we'll be able to get into that a little bit. And he has much more practice than I talking about this, of course. So there's the 10. So Daryl's idea of taking this big block, this Baja BC block, the insular superterranean and others, Mount Stewart getting farther and farther north between 85 and 55 million years ago. Now, today, let's go to western Idaho of all places, the western Idaho shear zone, named by Basil, I think, or maybe somebody earlier than him, the Wiz, W-I-S-Z. There's the Wiz in the context of much of the fruitcake that we were discussing 2 winters ago. The Blue Mountains are part of this, the Klamath Mountains, the Gold Beach terrain, some of the stuff in the foothills of the Sierras. I don't think we're ready to get deeply into that today. But this is the setting for 25 years worth of Basil Tikoff and his students. And we want to focus on western Idaho today. Personally, my introduction to Basil in the field, and much of this idea was at the western Idaho shear zone 6 years ago. I was on a field trip with a bunch of other geology teachers. The field trip was led by Andy Buddington from Spokane Community College. I met a number of people there for the first time. Keegan Schmidt, who went to Idaho State University right after I left. We were along the banks of the Salmon River, on the Snake River, if you know this country, by Whitebird or Riggins or McCall or Grangeville. That's where we were. A part of Idaho that I don't know very well. Even though I went to graduate school in Idaho, I was down in Pocatello in the southeastern part of the state. But this is extreme western Idaho. You kind of have to make it a point to get in there. It's not on the way really to anywhere. Hell's Canyon, we got in there. So I learned a lot. But the highlight for me, oh yeah, Hell's Canyon isn't as bad as it sounds. You got to love it. I don't know, is there an apostrophe in Hell's? Okay, I'm picky. The highlight for me was meeting Basil, who happened to just kind of show up magically at our campsite one night directly from Wisconsin. And the next day, he was holding court with us up in the Seven Devils Mountains. And as he was lecturing, it was just one day, I think, Basil, 2 nights maybe around the campfire, and then 1 full day with you. I just couldn't believe what I was hearing, all this rich detail from the western Idaho shear zone. And before I knew it, we were talking about Baja BC, which was just a crazy surprise to me. I just didn't expect that at all. I didn't know what I expected. But before we were done, we were talking about all these key places in the Cordillera that bared on this idea of being a mobilist. And it was an important day and a half essentially for me, learning directly from Basil and others. And this is Sean Wilsey. Some of you follow his YouTube channel. Plenty of really interesting folks. Basil doing interpretive dance here apparently. But the images never quit. The big poster-sized things that were propped up against the van sides. And I was just taking notes furiously and not understanding what I was hearing, basically. Trying to ask whoever was standing around me if they knew anything about this thing. After that trip, I got pretty interested in the exotic terrain stuff, and I started trying to make sketches for myself. These are like 5 years old, kind of embarrassing even to show them to you, but I was just reading and trying to make sketches just on my own without really knowing any of these cats who are doing the work. And I found an old book by Hill Williams. Should have forgot the name of it. Restless Northwest or something. I kind of forget. It's out of print, I think. But he had a little chapter. He was a Seattle Times science writer. Kind of interesting little way to present Baja BC to a general audience. I'm back to drawing other things. Been trying to decide which batholith is extracted from the coast. It's all amateur hour, at home with Bijou the cat. But anyway, it got me rolling with this sort of thing, and I really haven't stopped. This kind of concept of a huge insular superterrane swimming up the coastline like some sort of gray whale is really appealing to me. And whether it's now or the next Basil show, we want to get into that as well. So finally, here we are, the original paper that presented flat slab subduction, which again, still is the conventional story. 10 years later, Basil presents an alternative to that. Now, 25 years later, he's still presenting this hit and run model with all sorts of new data incorporated. And Basil argues that the new data sets continue to not really work well with the original flat slab subduction. This is the gray whale thing. I don't think I made up gray whale. Maybe Basil did or somebody else did, but I spent a lot of time with this morning, Basil. I don't know if we're going to have it when we talk to you, but, and this isn't in your new paper. This is in Basil's old paper, but this was new to me. The idea that if you really are Baja BC and you do have this big cartoonish block being moved north like a gray whale migrating north, you don't have active volcanoes directly inboard of this, but you do have active volcanoes on the gray whale, like it's almost a steam spout or something, because the subduction is happening on the western margin of Baja BC as opposed to happening on the western margin of the continent. And you even went on to say that as you migrate this thing north, you kill the volcanoes here and you reopen or you reactivate the volcanoes after the whale has passed. I don't know. Maybe you've gotten away from that, but that really struck me. Now we have these sexy new diagrams from Basil's new paper. And what do we do with this? There's lots to talk about, and it's now time to go to our guest at the half an hour mark. Okay, not terribly bad. I don't feel too awfully. Let me get my headphones, Basil, we're coming to you. And I don't know why, but I'm still weirded out today about audio and visual. So are we still okay? Are we still 5x5 guests before we go to Basil? Battery, 100%. Connected to Big Lappy, 2021. That's good. Let me confirm that is talking. Yes. And we're 5x5. Wonderful. We go to Madison, Wisconsin. Hi, Basil.
Hey, Nick.
Hey, same here. You're looking and sounding great. Thank you for making yet another appearance. Do you realize you were on 3 times last winter?
Seems like I talk a lot.
That's a record. No, you were so good. We just kept wanting to come. In fact, that first show, I think it was almost to the day. I think you did the show right before Thanksgiving last year also, just for bookkeeping purposes. But that appearance, I rewatched it recently, and what you were doing with us then kind of basically set up the rest of the winter. So I want to thank you live for that, because you took us in a direction that I wasn't going before. So you laid it all out perfectly. I'm putting pressure on you now. I'm hoping for the same kind of thing today.
Well, I enjoyed all of the series, so.
Thank you. Yes, as I mentioned in the intro, I'd like your backstory, please, however much you're willing to share with us. As I was doing with Daryl, I was just curious at what point he got into thinking about Baja BC and why he was so open to the paleomagnetic data. So is it in grad school or is it earlier than that you're starting this thinking?
No, it was in grad school. And the reason is, so Daryl cut his teeth, I believe is the expression in the Franciscan, but I started in the Sierra Nevada. And I was studying the youngest Plutonism there. And I kept running into right lateral faults that went right up the middle of the arc. And so it became, well, what are these doing here? And, there was pushback. People were like, there's no strike slip in the arc. And I'm like, well, tell that to the shear zones that are on the ground, right? So there's no doubt that they were there, but there was pushback on that. And I was, that's really weird. I mean, it's just, they're there. And then I realized at the time, it's because all of a sudden, when you start putting strike slip into things, the accordion just doesn't work anymore, right? And so we are in the California triad and it's not working. It's sort of the place where it should work. So,
well, let me hold you up. So was that your original plan for your dissertation, to work in the Sierra?
Yes.
And did you finish a project there?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, my PhD is in the Sierra Nevada, but it switched from Pluton emplacement, which is what it was supposed to be about, to really the shear zones. Because the shear zone just kept going and going. The same one kept going and going.
What were you seeing in the Sierra to know that you had that strike slip motion?
That's a great question. So I had only the fabrics in the granite. So it was really sort of the nerdy end of tectonics. So I was really thinking about just which way the granites were telling me they sheared, and I didn't have much offset markers. And then I ran into David Green. David was working along, so my shear zone basically ran right into his shear zone, except mine, this, had these nice horizontal orientations that said, oh yeah, that's strike slip. And we went right into David's, where everything went vertical, where all the lineation started going vertical. And so we could have competed, but instead we were like, well, let's figure this out together. So and it started both a great professional relationship, but also a personal relationship, when you realize you just get more by working with people than you do otherwise. And what's funny is you go out of it to the north, and it goes back to not quite horizontal, but shallow to the north. So you could just, and it's like, this is weird, right? This is not what we expect.
And what kind of dates were you documenting for the shearing?
That's a great question. So it had to happen while the Pluton was intruding. So I didn't have good geochronology or good geochronological control. So it was the age of the Plutons, which was sort of mid 80 million years ago.
Okay, I don't want to derail you, but I got to say, right now, I'm thinking of the Ross Lake Fault Zone with the stuff I've been doing with Bob Miller and Stacia Gordon. And they're, especially this past summer, Bob's like, yeah, there's all this strange motion on the Ross Lake, but there's all these Plutons coming up basically at the same time. And I was like, I didn't see that before. Are there parallels just generally with that concept with these two places?
Yeah. So what you'll see is that is going to happen over and over again. So it happens in Ross Lake, it happens in Idaho, it happens in Nevada, it happens in Mexico. So I started sort of working this out in 85. And the reason to do that is because, as you said, the Plutonism stops. So there's nothing to overprint it, because it's like it shuts down.
Yeah.
But when you look earlier and earlier in the Sierra, you can look at the 100 million years, and you also are getting dextral shear zones, but they're intruded out by other magmas. So something starts, and it starts somewhere around 100 million years, and everything is dextral. It's like all of a sudden everything's dextral.
Huh. One more thing before we move on, if you don't mind, not to name call, but like, who was the pushback? Was it an older generation that just was vehemently disagreeing with this because they had their simple model of the Sierra in mind?
It's an interesting question. It was hard to know, but there was sort of a older generation. A lot of them were from the U.S. Geological Survey. And to give credit to these guys, they did the quadrangle maps. So they looked at the maps of the area, and they were basically the basis of what I was doing. There was one person, Jack Lockwood, who did the exact quadrangle where I started on, and he was hugely supportive. He was like, oh yeah, this is great. This makes sense of why I was seeing all these other fault zones through the whole thing. So, again, there's some people who are very open-minded and very sort of supportive. And then there's other people who sort of see what they want to see rather than seeing what's on the ground.
Okay, so that's University of Minnesota. You get the PhD and you're kind of done with that project. What happens next?
Actually, it turns out it's going to be more complicated than that. So at the same time I was doing my PhD in the Sierra Nevada, I had a good friend, Julie Maxon, who was the person I wrote the paper with. She was working in the Canadian Rockies on a place called Mount Tatlow, and the sedimentology of the series of mid-Cretaceous rocks. And what happened was they started working collaboratively with Ted Irving's group, and particularly Jane Wynn. So Julie and Jane and their supervisors basically all wrote a paper in 1994, and this is the Mount Tatlow study. And so this is the one that causes people problems because it is like the perfect paleomag test. There's interbedded sandstones, there's interbedded sandstones and volcanic rocks. They're folded. I'm going to get it out of prop here. They have a magnetic signature on them. They're folded, and if you unfold them to their original layers, they go back, and the paleomag points in exactly the same way on the different sides of the fold. And it does it for the volcanics and the sediments. and it says that it's gone 3,000 kilometers.
Okay. So this is a classmate and a friend on a totally separate project than your own. You weren't doing paleomag at all with the Sierra Nevada?
No, but you have to hold on. I'll get back to that. No, for my
Yeah.
PhD, I wasn't doing that at all.
Okay. Okay.
And
Keep
so
going. This is
at
great.
that point, Paul Umhofer leaves the University of Washington and he comes to the University of Minnesota as a postdoc. He actually stopped in Southern California on the way there. And so he had worked with Daryl. He had been thinking about all of these things and was working in the same groups. And he kept saying, you know, Julie and Basil, your field areas might have been in the same place while the deformation you're seeing has collided. So, I mean, to give Paul a huge credit, he was sort of the person who sort of pulled it out. But it made sense, right? It made sense with my data, which was right lateral. It made sense with Julie's data, which had gone a long way. So that's sort of how all of that worked.
Did you add a section to your PhD on this translation business, or you just kind of were doing it for fun almost with Julie and Paul?
I was sort of for fun, basically,
Yeah.
because the Sierra is what was paying the bills, right? Because it became there was so much to do there. And then another.
I'm sorry. Do you remember why Julie went and did that Mount Tatlow study?
That was her PhD.
But why did her advisor send her there, or what was the context there?
It was the context was about right lateral motions because these sediments called the Tyouten Basin were thought to be possibly connected to the Methow Basin, which is just further south and on the opposite side of a series of faults.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And so the question was, sedimentologically, can you put them back together? And then if you do that, then paleomagnetically, you should be able to put them back together. But then paleomag has, of course, the Tatlow way down there. But it turns out the Methow is also quite confusing because it's remagnetized, but it's gone quite a ways itself. So it became a very it became kind of geologically confusing, but they had both traveled a long way.
So I want to keep going with the story. It's perfect for what we're doing today, but is it this point where you're open already to paleomag because of your connection to Julie and maybe indirectly to Ted Irving? Or why didn't, like I did with Daryl last time, like you're a field guy, why are you open to this paleomag when so many people aren't?
Okay, so that's a great question that has both a professional and a personal answer. So the professional answer was, when you study granite, there's a technique you can use that involves the magnetic properties of rocks. It doesn't matter that it's called the anisotropy of magnetic susceptibility, but it just means you're using the magnetites and the other mineral, any mineral in the rock, to tell you something about the granite fabrics, because granite fabrics are really weak. I mean, it's you have to squint a lot to sort of figure out what's going on with the granite. And so it's not paleomag, but it's rock magnetism. So I was already sort of thinking, I was professionally starting to use that. And then, so that's the professional. So that's why, and I should say that the University of Minnesota has this Institute for Rock Magnetism, which is probably the best rock magnetism lab in the country.
Oh, wow.
So that was one reason. And then the second reason is another odd one. In about 1995, another structural geologist who does a lot of paleomag, in fact, he was kind of a mixture person, comes from the University of Michigan. And he comes to the University of Minnesota because of this strong rock lab, rock magnetism lab. His name is Bernie Housen. So Bernie Housen and I get to know each other at the University of Minnesota before Bernie knows anything about sort of, well, I shouldn't say that, before he's involved in research on sort of these far traveled terrains. So he and I sort of are talking together then. And then he goes to like the ultra hotbed of mobilism, which is Western Washington University. And so like all things, right? It's all about personal contacts. And so it's sort of who I was interacting with at that time. So again, just like Daryl had said last time, there was a bit of a swirl going on at the University of Washington, and I think that swirl was around Daryl. And in Minnesota, there was a more distributed swirl, but early 90s, a lot of people were thinking about the same sort of issues.
Okay, well, I'm just loving this. Please continue. Are we heading to Western Idaho now, or we got a couple more chapters before we do that?
I think we have one more chapter.
Okay.
So Julie and I and Brian Mahoney basically proposed a Penrose, and we ran a Penrose in 1999 to just get people together and say, is this real? What do we do about this? With the idea of sort of promoting it a little bit. And I think we got to the point where it's at the end of the conference, we're like, there are things we can do next, but it's not obvious. And it's not clear how you're going to convince anybody from one side to jump to the other or vice versa. So basically it didn't bog down, but it became clear that there wasn't enough data in the right places. So either you were going to buy the paleomagnetic data as right, or you weren't. And there wasn't sort of much in between.
Did that Penrose in 99 happen in part because of Daryl's 1997 crucial test paper?
Definitely. I mean, whether it was the 94 or the 97, you can argue. Daryl forgot about the 94, which I thought was great. Whereas I think that one might have been more impactful in the long run, because he popularized this idea that there's this major problem and we should be thinking about it. And I think that's the one that, I mean, for the next, I don't know, 5 years or so, you saw the diagram that Daryl drew quite a few places, right? Like people were trying to figure this out and see where it was.
So I keep hearing about that 99 Penrose. It happened at the Red Barn in Winthrop, I guess. And so nothing really major came out of that? Like I keep looking for some tangible result of that discussion, or was the result just like, okay, we just can't do what we're hoping to do?
It'd be interesting to talk to somebody else who has a little bit of a less of a vested interest in having but I think the reality was that it was unclear what to do and how to do it, but we knew we needed more data. And so I think this is a good segue. So Daryl proposed the tests, but Daryl's tests are mostly coastal tests, which is appropriate, right? Because that's the stuff that's moving. So when I thought about it, I was like, well, look, I took a completely different approach. First of all, I didn't want to do detrital zircons, although it turns out I missed that boat because everybody's doing detrital zircons. I could have been part of the club, but I'm not. So I said, look, where is the single most important place for which we have no data that would actually constrain this? And I had been thinking about that before, that sort of crystallized it. In 99, I was like, okay, this is what we got to do. And the answer to that is Idaho. And the reason is California is this beautiful, it's this triad. It's the subduction zone, the arc, the forearc, right? It's got everything. People don't even worry about strike slip, despite the fact there's strike slip faults there. Fine. Right. And then you look in Canada, and it's all accreted terrains all the time, right? And they have to have come from somewhere. They have to be colliding. Idaho fit neither model. It just never got put into the Cordillera. It doesn't look like British Columbia, and it doesn't look like California. Something else had happened there. And I thought, okay, if we're going to figure this out, we got to go where there's no data, sort of the hit them where they ain't approach to geology. So I just kind of made a gamble on my career that would be a really useful thing to do. And it takes a long time. Like the Sierra, it's easy to study because there's so much data. There's so many people. In Idaho, there really wasn't very much. So it took a long time to sort of work out some of the basics. And I mean, they're great geologists, but there are few of them.
Well, I can confirm, here I am in southern Idaho in the late 1980s. I think I'm just a few years older than you, Basil. So we're basically in grad school roughly the same time. Admittedly, I'm in southeastern Idaho in Pocatello. I'm not over by the Snake, but there was no discussion of the Western Idaho shear zone or whatever they were calling it at the time. And it did seem like you're the first guy that I'd ever met that had been working in there. Were you truly like, well, two things. Were you going to Western Idaho for sure with Baja BC on the brain?
Yes.
Huh. And you were hoping in a few years to document a major strike slip fault, and it turned out to be 25 years?
Yeah, and keeps going. So I thought, for instance, it might be possible that the Western Idaho shear zone was the Baja BC fault. I thought all the terrains are outboard. It's possible everything moved on this. I was wrong. I mean, it was a dark day when I figured that one out. That it just could not work. And the reason is the Western Idaho shear zone turns off right as everything else starts to move. And it's like, wait a minute, which means we fundamentally did not understand something. And it also had the same character that all the lineations were up and down. It was moving side by side, but all the lineations were vertical. So I spent a long time sort of working out the details of that. But the timing simply didn't work. It did work that it was dextral, so we got something out of it, but it didn't work out to be the Baja BC fault.
So just for the viewers, again, I want to remind you that we're kind of doing the grand arc story here today with Basil, and we will be getting down into the nitty gritty. But I do feel, Basil, we have to give some of the cliff notes of what you have determined there. So there was dextral motion in Western Idaho between 100 and 85. How much offset did you end up with?
Hard to estimate. If you made me guess, I'd say about 400 kilometers of right lateral.
Okay. But that's not nearly 3,000, and that's too old also.
Well, that's exactly right. I mean, the problem is all the paleomag starts moving at about 85. So that's like a bonus 400, right? That doesn't even count.
Right. Okay.
So, and you talk about symbols and how you smash them together, right?
Yeah. Oh, if you like that?
Yeah, I like that a lot.
Okay.
So the problem in Idaho is there was like a bunch of marshmallow goo between that, which are those plutons. And so as you squeeze two very long symbols like this, it's going to push stuff up out the top. So everybody's expecting like the symbols to like rub against each other and leave little streaks, right? But instead you're doing this and it's squirting out the top.
Top up or top north?
Top up. It's
top
going
up. Huh. Just again, another derailment. So besides the Ross Lake fault zone and the Sierra Nevada and the Western Idaho shear zone, what are two or three more that have shearing, but also just chock full of this marshmallow business?
So Northwestern Nevada probably has the same thing. A PhD student working with me just worked that out. So Sarah Trevino did that. It's possible that the Peninsula Ranges are doing the same thing. So, but there's a bunch of right lateral faults that are going on at that time. And they're not abundant before about 100 million years. In fact, it's really hard to put your finger on a fault that is moving dextrally before 100 million years, or shear zone.
Well, I'm wanting to, I'll ask it. Why not? I think at some point we're going to have a letter or two devoted to like looking for the fault or whatever. We're not the first to do it. But it seems to me that I think that's what you're saying right here. Looking for a brittle fault like the San Andreas is not likely. You have these plutons masking the strike slip motion, and or you have uplift of these originally brittle things. So now you've got a ductile shear zone as opposed to brittle because you've lifted it 50 kilometers. Am I on the mark with some of that?
Yeah. So you've lifted it 10 kilometers, but yes, okay. You've lifted it up so you can't see it. It's really easy to destroy a strike slip fault, as it turns out. So that's part of the problem. The other problem, and I should be clear about this. So the paper is by myself, as well as Julie Maxson, as well as Bernie Housen. And that's, I think, what makes it so strong. Bernie in particular did a great job of including all sort of the most recent paleomag in it. But on your 1 to 10 scale, it turns out there's a lot of 10s, because there's a 10 hit and run type approach. There's the 10 sort of what I would call Daryl approach, which is sort of moving the terrains themselves, and maybe they have less of an effect on North America. There's
Okay.
there's the 10 Bob Hildebrand and probably Scott Johnston approach, which is instead of subducting it one way, you're actually subducting it westwardly, and then other things kind of are climbing on to North America. So there's various ways you can be a 10.
Well, we're going to have all those 10s on, by the way. So Bob
cool.
Hildebrand's up for this. Stephen Johnston's up for this. I just heard from Karen Siglock. She wants to come back. Jane Wynn. So yeah, I mean, we're going to be able to hear. It's going to be fun just to put human voices and faces on much of this work. But I don't want to let this go. Before viewers, we're coming to you in just a second. I already see some uppercase here, but I promise we're almost to the top of the hour. Basil, you're very clear in this paper that you're starting with the assumption that the paleomag is right. So I want to come back to that. So why have you not, just on a general sense, why have you stuck with the paleomag all these years, whereas some people just kind of eventually, it seems like, just kind of drift away from the whole thing? Why are you still in this game?
Oh, that's an interesting question. I think if the insular terrain was still offshore from Idaho to Mexico, and it was plastered on the edge, we wouldn't even be having this debate. Everybody would be like, oh yeah, right? It's got to be some kind of collision. And I think when you look at collisional mountain belts, things like the Himalayas, you see exactly the same things you see in the Rocky Mountains. You see these thrust belts, you see Laramide block uplifts, you see all of these same things, and yet you don't call on shallow slab for any of them. Mm-hmm. Because they're I mean, this is what collisions do. And so there's a pretty clear signature. And the problem is the Rocky Mountains look a whole lot more like a collision than they do like a shallow slab. And that's even using the shallow slab in the Andes, which I'm not sure is a great analog.
Yeah.
The alternative is I'm incredibly stubborn, which is also true. So.
Well, I mean, I think I want to ask you exactly what I asked Daryl, and his answer was, I don't know. Why do you think so many people don't believe this paleomagnetic data? It's been 50 years of this stuff.
I think I've thought a little bit about this since you asked him. I think the answer is we think that we know what happened and why the Rocky Mountains went up, and which is the shallow slab. And if you accept that there is most people would like to interpret their data, which has a whole bunch of regional puzzles, just in terms of something so they can get it published.
Right.
Whereas if you have like a new model, it's not very easy to get it accepted. Or if you're thinking about things in other ways, it's not easy to get accepted, right? That you're kind of, if you're going to challenge something that everybody thinks, you're kind of, and I used this term last year, you're kind of on the lunatic fringe, right? Mm-hmm. Where it's easy to dismiss not just that part of your work, but like all parts of your work. And so I think I went quiet on it myself for a while, just while I worked out what are the details, in part in Idaho, so I had a coherent story, so that I had a strong base to come out of. So that's part of it. But the other part is when I published the paper with Julie Maxson in '96, a lot of people, I mean, it didn't take off. And I think it's because there wasn't enough detail in it. So people would acknowledge that there was a problem, and that's how it gets cited. But if you really wanted people to change people's mind, you had to lay out an entire hypothesis, like a whole series of, this is the story. This is the story about how this different way could work. And so even when I do that now, the first question I get has nothing to do with the laramide, and it usually is about why there's Eocene and Oligocene magmatism.
Yeah.
And it's like, and that's fine. Those are ancillary or auxiliary
Right.
hypotheses.
Right.
But the point is, you've got to take on the whole banana, right? And so that's what that very long recent paper is, which tries to say, look, you throw out the paleomag if you want to, but this works, right? If you think about the Cordillera in a slightly different way, it really makes sense that there was this thing at 100 million years. And Bob Hildebrand's also said that we've missed this 100 million year big event because we were so focused on what we thought was the case, but not be. And you can argue about what that 100 million year event is, but the fact that there was a 100 million year event and it's dextral in a lot of places is really kind of hard to avoid. It's like back to the Sierra. It's there. How you interpret it, it's up to you. It does not fit very well in an accordion model.
Well, I admire your dedication. If you want to call it stubbornness, that's fine. But I mean, Daryl clearly eventually got to a point where he's like, I just don't want to deal with this anymore. He was getting a bunch of pushback. I don't know if you're getting pushback over the years or if it's the silent treatment or somewhere in between. I don't know. But you're back with this stuff and these new data sets are incorporated. And I had a hell of a good time reading it the last few days. I understood most of it, Basil. I'm happy to report that. So you wrote it beautifully. And so, yes, viewers, that's waiting for you. And it will it's one of those, I think, that's going to make more and more sense, at least with what Basil's saying in this new paper with his co-authors as the winter goes on. It's probably going to be one of those that we have to keep revisiting, whether you're with us or not, Basil, I'm guessing. I want to talk about the Penrose, but let's save that to the end, Basil. So viewers, can we go to you now, please? It's about 3 o'clock, the top of the hour. You got another 10, 15 minutes, Basil, possibly?
Sure, absolutely.
Okay, thank you. Oscar asks, Basil, what kind of evidence would convince you the paleomagnetic evidence is wrong?
That's a good question. So if, for instance, there was paleomag from other rocks that were clearly on North America, but seemed to also move, but couldn't have moved, that would convince me. The problem with that is there's paleomag from the Sierra Nevada from exactly the same time on exactly the same rock types that say it's more or less in place. It's actually about 300 kilometers. You can argue whether it's 200 or 300. But basically, there's nothing in the Cordillera that's fixed. If the Sierra Nevada is moving, everything's moving.
Right. But just 300 kilometers as opposed to 3,000. Your rocks in the Sierra Nevada.
That's right. So basically, the paleomag says from the same time that they haven't moved. If instead you saw that, or if you saw crazy patterns in the paleomag, right? If they really were like, oh, it's shallow now, and now it's really steep, and then it goes back to really shallow.
Yeah.
You would also say, okay, there might be a problem. And, sometimes there's sort of paleomagnetic arguments, like you can break down that very simple dipole for very short periods of time. That we see no evidence for that. And in fact, Bernie's point in the paper is we see a clear evidence of the younger it gets, the further north it is. The paleomag is tracking the northward motion.
Oh, wow. Well, viewers, in case it's unclear to you, we're definitely going to spend a number of letters on paleomag. I know very little about it. I nod furiously, but half the time I don't know what's going on. But I'm working with the schedule of these other guests that I have lined up. So I'm kind of doing that right now. So I can't promise when, but we will definitely be getting into the paleomag if that's starting to frustrate you. Sauber, what is the difference between a shear zone like the Wiz and a fault like the San Andreas Fault?
Great question. It's the depth in the crust. So for instance, if you follow the San Andreas down for more than about, let's say 12 to 15 kilometers. So what are we talking about that? About 10 miles. The rocks are hot enough that they start to pull like taffy rather than break. And so you get shear zones at depth. And so we know the San Andreas Fault not only goes to a shear zone in the lower crust, it goes into a shear zone in the mantle, and it ultimately, this is work by Carmen Fisher and other people, offsets the lithosphere asthenosphere boundary, which means
yeah.
it really is the entire tectonic plate is moving on the San Andreas system. The Pacific plate moving that way, North America moving that way, depends on, it's all relative. It's how you think about it.
That's cool. I've never heard that before. That's neat. Thank you. The device 9, Basil, can you have a Baja BC and still have flat slab subduction in the Rockies? Are they really mutually exclusive?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And Gene Humphreys prods me on this every once in a while. I think Paul Umhofer is the one who convinced him that Baja BC was real, but he's a major proponent of shallow slabs. So it becomes a question of how fast can you move the insular terrain out of the way in order to put a shallow slab behind it. So it might be, but basically no one's done that hard work to look at. But I'm going to back that up a step, which is you can explain everything without a shallow slab. The shallow slab was the crutch you put in because you couldn't explain these things. But if you don't think there's a shallow slab, it turns out you don't need a shallow slab to explain anything. You can explain almost all the patterns with just a moving terrain that's blocking off the magmatism, and then when it does move by, it reinitiates normal subduction. So it's permissible that you could in fact have both, but it turns out the timing is really hard to pull off.
Yeah. I didn't come with that whale thing, right? Somebody else came up with that whale analogy.
I'm trying to remember where the whale came up. I kind of like the whale. I got to admit.
I do too. It's perfect. They're migrating from Baja up to Alaska. I'm like, come on, man, it's perfect. Brent asks, is it possible that the strike slip faults were subducted?
That's an interesting question. It's possible they were overprinted. I'd have to think about whether they were actually subducted or not. There are faults that have big offsets that we don't even see. Like we know the Gold Beach terrain has moved about 1,500 kilometers, and it has a fault contact with the rest of the Klamath. That fault has to have 1,000 kilometers of motion, but we don't even see the damn thing at the surface. Oops, sorry. We don't. So we don't see that.
You don't see it at the surface. What do you see at the surface?
A lot of poison oak, as it turns out. So, right, it's just those rocks paleomagnetically have come from far away. There's also good detrital signatures, and this is work by Rich Gashnig and a student, Erica, that have also suggested they've moved far. So it's one of these cases where if the paleomag and the detrital zircon agree, you're really on to something. And I think that also, it might be the paleomag plus detrital zircon combo is what's convincing people more lately. Why things are moved.
You really think there are some converts in the last decade, even a small degree?
They say
sliding on the scale.
New theories are often promoted one retirement at a time. So it might be that sort of an older generation that is less interested in sort of seeing that mobilism might be moving on, or it could be that other people are equally fixed. But I find young people tend to be more open. And, you know, there have been ideas out there, right? Like Daryl's paper or the first hit and run paper. They have important roles as placeholders, that it's like there are other ideas out here about how this might work. Or even Bob Hildebrandt's work is another example. You know, it's a little far out sometimes in terms of what he wants subducted, but it says there may be different ways of thinking about this that are testable, and that's a useful contribution.
Well, if we're talking about goals for this series, I guess one is it'd be nice to have some young people starting to work on this. Like if folks are just not aware that there's still work to be done on this, it'd be exciting to see. Have you had some former students contribute to this?
Yes, we have, but again, how do I want to say this? didn't really want to promote people to do this because, again, if you're seen as a little wacko, right? The idea that you might not get jobs and get papers published might not be. It's harder to do, right? In some ways, science is a little bit more like junior high social dynamics than we would care to admit.
Oh my God.
But from what I do, it's very detailed structural geology, and they're quite good. So Scott Georges, who worked a lot on the Western Iowa Shear Zone, did a really nice job. His work is really very structural in nature, but it has tectonic implications. So yeah, I've had lots of students do that sort of thing.
Yeah. Thanks for the questions, everybody. I'm sorry I'm going so slow. I'm back quite a ways. Spreading Ridge John Nash asks, could the lost Baja BC strike slip fault underlie the spine of the Cascade Range?
Maybe. At least a good portion of it could be. The problem, which you'll see later in this series, is something called the Carmax group, which is really far east. And the only fault that can move it is the Tintina. It's the only thing that's between North America and the Carmax. And Randy Enkins worked a lot on those rocks. The data look really good. If you think, and it's 1800 plus or minus. So it suggests that the slip is going to be further east than the Cascade core, but it's not clear, besides the Tintina, how to bring that slip down through sort of southern British Columbia is not very clear at all. So I can't, it's possible, and it's likely that some slip is hidden in the Cascade core, maybe on the Ross Lake fault zone, but it's not clear that that's going to be the structure that moves most of it.
Yeah, thank you. Let's keep going. I'm down live. I'm blocking spam at the same time. X-rated stuff. Delightful. David asks, Jason Salibi's work in the Southern Sierra over the decades has a flat slab tearing the keel of the mountain range. Basil, can you live with that?
Yes. So it turns out there's some major geometric problems in the Southern Sierra that are hard to get around with a westward dipping slab. Jason Salibi was, what I will give him a huge amount of credit for, is he realized that there was a major problem and that you could not put a shallowly subducting slab underneath the main portion of the Sierra. And the reason is his own data, working with Mihai Ducea, suggested that, and these are, it's kind of a complicated argument, but he has evidence that the Sierra Nevada was 130 kilometers thick in round numbers. So over 100 miles thick. And you can't put a shallow slab under that, right? Because as Karen Sicklock shows, once they start going down, they basically go straight down. So Salibi understands that problem and says, as an alternative, what happens if we sneak it in the Mojave sector? And the Mojave sector, relative to anything else in the Western Cordillera, is completely destroyed by 100 million year to 85 million year old tectonism. There's just a lot going on. And so his idea of where to put it is reasonable. The problem is, to do that with the plate motions, you're basically moving that slab north, and all the shortening features are east-west.
A couple more. How about three more? John Ogden, what's the evidence for shallow slab? Where did this thing even come from at the beginning? So we're back pretty early. Well, I don't know. I'll let you just answer. Why was that even a thing, and why is it still so dominant?
So that is a great sociological question. So Dickinson and Snyder in 1978, in the era of disco, proposed this model. And they say, look, this doesn't look like, this can't be a collisional model because there's no collider. It can't be a strike slip model because we don't see any big strike slip faults. And it can't be an arc. I think the third was an arc. Actually, don't quote me on that. So they thought about collisional models, but they said, or strike slip, they were like, we can't do it. There's no evidence for it. We have to come up with something new. And at that time, the data was just coming in from South America that there was two shallow slab subducting segments, and one of them had these mountain ranges called the Sierra Pampeana. So that's where it came from. So they discounted everything. The sociology part of it is there was no idea. There was no there was no sort of community accepted pre-existing idea. So this hypothesis that it's a shallow slab goes right from a hypothesis to paradigm without ever stopping on the tested phase. And it's Eldridge Moores who pointed that out, among other people. So you have this thing that's an idea that just gets accepted by the community rather than going through okay, if that's true, what are all the things that basically we would expect to see about that?
Well, you mentioned Eldridge. His name pops up every once in a while. I wish we could have him on the show as well, but passed away a couple of years ago. Were you working with Eldridge Moores, and how influential was his thinking on what you've written up here?
So I write this in the acknowledgments of the paper. So the older you get, the more the acknowledgments are really interesting. So Eldridge was part of this project. He was very pleased to be talking about it. He was like, this is an idea I've had for quite a while, and you can see that in the literature. And he was very kind and invited me out to his house, and we drew up the first of the paleogeographic maps. He died tragically very soon after that. And I made that decision. I just thought we can't put him on as a co-author if he's never seen any of that. And so, but his fingerprints are all over this one, basically.
As well as Paul Umhofer?
Very much so. Paul was more of how do I want to say this? Paul got the ball rolling in the first place. Paul was kind of more in his strategy, which was probably the right strategy, was to try and bring everybody along. So Paul sort of had all these sort of moderate translation models where you try and accommodate most of the paleomag, but also try and accommodate the shallow slab. And he has several papers where he's trying to do that. And sort of to take on the whole thing, to say, no, the paleomag is just full scale right, you have to be up for some level of disagreement. And Nick, you started this on, I think, session 1, where you said, I'm not into controversy. And I think controversy is when you make personal attacks and you take it personally. And that's bad. I'm with you there. But disagreements are necessary, right? You have to be able to say maybe there are other ways we can do this, and maybe there are fruitful avenues. And what's been clear to me about the shallow slab is this thinking about it is a little bit sloppy, I would say, because they can say, oh yeah, this whatever I'm saying, I can relate to the shallow slab, rather than saying there's an alternative hypothesis. So I have to tell you where I am, where I think the slab is through time. So if nothing else, having an alternative model will sharpen the other model for saying, where is that slab and when? Because there's a lot of things that are kind of problematic about the model. It's very two-dimensional, right? And it's very safe. All you do is shallow it, put it back in. If you go to this next view, it's very three-dimensional and very time-dependent. It's just more difficult, right? It's just a harder thing to deal with. But, if that's the way life is, then that's the way the Cordillera is.
Okay, I got 2 more things. And before I forget, it's just always such a pleasure to talk to you, by the way. Regardless if we're doing it in this format or just seeing each other at a conference, it's just thrilling to talk with you. You're so easy to visit with. Is this new paper out? Are you starting to get feedback already from your brand new hit and run paper?
No, not yet, and it's because it's not officially published. It's only out in preprint form, basically.
Okay. Is it okay that I shared it with the audience here?
Absolutely.
Okay. Okay. Next question. Let's say it gets published next year and is out there. Do you expect any reaction? You've been around for a while. You kind of know that quite often nobody reads it, or just another thing from Basil? What's your anticipation about the reaction that you might have from this paper, if any?
Well, it's interesting. And again, it gets more back to sociology. If enough people are like, there's a problem, maybe we should maybe we should be thinking about this, then it becomes important. The most likely reaction is nothing. That basically people will say, yeah, that's just another one of the many crazy ideas that are out there. And so what I hope is sort of the 25 years of wandering around the Idaho wilderness has gotten me enough credibility to basically say, this person has thought a lot about what's going on there, and it's worth at least considering. And then once that happens, then it's into, the pros and cons, and then you're actually doing science, right?
Right. Well, speaking of which, I promise this is the last thing. So you submitted a proposal for a new Penrose conference that is directly related to Baja BC or indirectly. I'm not sure. How do you want to describe the conference, and when and where will it be?
So it's myself, Stacia Gordon from Reno, Elena Centeno Garcia from Mexico City, and Will Matthews from Calgary. And we realized you have to take on the whole thing all at once, the whole Cordillera. And so we wanted people from different places. We're going to meet in late August in first Riggins, Idaho, and then McCall, Idaho, to see different parts of this system. And if we do other things associated with it, that would be great. And so this meeting will have about 75 people, and they'll all be talking about, what can we make work? What are the problems? What do we all agree on? And then what are sort of the points of contention, and how can we go at that? It might be that we're at the case where we are saying we can come up with a reasonable model for how this might work.
Will there be a bunch of 9s and 10s at the conference?
I think you have to be willing to be over a 6.
Okay. All right. And I'll be there. Thanks for the invite. And we're pretty loose, I guess, on our thinking, but you kind of wanted to involve this live group somehow. What's your early thinking on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's been so much fun to interact, and this group is kind of it's kind of interesting. It sort of promoted me into science and thinking about like how to explain things in better ways and what other things we should be thinking about. So it might be fun to have people come out if they're willing to do that, and maybe meet us for a couple days before or a couple days after the conference, and just go along and see some of the same sites that the professional crew did. And there's advantages to both, right? If we go afterwards, we can talk about what the professionals were talking about at those places. If we do it before, that would help me to sort of, think through, oh yeah, this is, we should be thinking about that too, and so forth.
Yeah. Well, you brought it up more than once, so I think you're serious about it. And whether it's some of these folks in person in Idaho, or some combo of that plus me live streaming from the venue, or some kind of Starlink thing out in the middle of nowhere, I don't know. But we're going to continue to talk about that, I guess. But it's what are the dates again? In August sometime? It's not July. I think I've announced July, but you got pushed back to August?
Right, because of the venue
Okay.
issue. So it's going to be the 18th through the 25th. And so that's for the 75 participants we have. And then we'll have time either before or after.
Yeah. Okay. Well, late August 2023, everybody. I'll keep you posted on that. And that's really exciting. And Basil, I just want to say thanks so much for being with us again. And we'll have you back once we kind of learn some more of our stuff between me and these guys. We'll bone up on our details, and then we'll get more out of you next time. How about that?
That sounds great. Thanks, as always, Nick.
Thank you, Basil. Have a good night. Happy Thanksgiving.
Bye.
Bye-bye. That was Dr. Basil Tikoff. University of Wisconsin, Madison, Wisconsin, my alma mater from long ago. I learned a lot, and I hope that you did too with that visit. And I don't know why, but I feel like I have to remind you one more time. We're done with these first 3 shows setting up kind of the broad narrative of the Baja BC experience. And to me, that means being a minority opinion, writing papers and not having many people read it. Try to keep going with data collection and involving different folks and getting the word out there somehow. But it's a long process that is still a process. It's still a minority opinion, as we've discussed. But what we do here, and then going down to Reno, Nevada for the Cordilleran meeting, will be a session devoted to this, and then Basil and Stacia in late August, as you just heard. So there'll be plenty of activity in the next year devoted to thinking about these things, maybe more so than has happened in the last couple of decades. And what the result of that will be, who knows? But at least we're kind of in learning from these folks directly, which is the point of the whole thing. And you're all saying thank you to Basil, which always makes me happy / emotional. A toast to you. Here's to you for being with us on Thanksgiving Eve. Gesundheit. Here's to Basil and his generosity with his time. And it's not, for all these guests, it's not just the time that they're with us, but it's a previous session with me, testing out the technology, that adds up. Then it's emailing back and forth with me about papers and what we're going to talk about. So, it's more than just a few minutes of prep for this. So thanks to Basil and all the guests for being willing to be on this program. Here's to the health of your family, especially if you're seeing them now or in the next couple of days. But even if you're not, family is important, as we all know. Here's to all of our families and their health. And here's to everyone in your community, whether they are related to you or not. We all need community, and I hope that you have a large community, whatever that community means. I hope that they give you strength in these times that we live in. So that concludes the first of our 3 episodes. And if you missed any of those 3, I guess you have a full week to do your homework, because we are taking a short break for the holiday weekend here in the United States. And so, as I announced at the beginning of the show today, I will not see you on Saturday. We normally do these shows Wednesday at 2 p.m., Saturdays at 9 a.m. Liz and I will be in Oregon this Saturday, so I will not see you. But our next show with a mystery guest, because it's a mystery to me. I don't know who it's going to be. I'll figure something out. And we will be seeing you all next Wednesday, November 30th at 2 p.m. Pacific time. Thank you, dear viewer. I love you, and goodbye from Ellensburg, Washington, USA. Upside down. Hang on. Binman's Bakery. in downtown Ellensburg, Washington. You gotta love it.